Soaring through the skies on wings or just on your own arcane powers. Flight is a power that almost every individual dreams about at some point in their life, and Dungeons & Dragons is a game full of possibilities to give to players in order to grant them that wish. I'm RPGMD, writing you a prescription on all things dice, dragons, and gaming, and today's video will be going through all things flying in Dungeons & Dragons. We will start the video by looking at flight as a mechanic and how it varies in some ways from general movement in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We'll then move on to the various ways that players can get access to flight, which includes things such as spells, magic items, or even consumables like scrolls or potions. After this, we'll be looking at how best to run flight in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign using a three-dimensional space with things such as miniatures, and wrap up by looking at what happens when flight ends in your campaign and things fall down. Shit! Flying works very similarly to general movement in Dungeons & Dragons, albeit with the obvious part of adding a Z-axis, or the ability to increase or decrease the height of your character. With this, there are certain situations that flight is less optimal for, such as caves or buildings in closed spaces, as these will obviously limit your ability to increase your height. When a character takes flight, they exchange their movement speed for a flying speed instead, which can be the same, faster, or slower than their general movement. They are then granted access to the ability to increase or decrease their verticality, and must take this into account when calculating the distance that a player can travel in one turn. Otherwise, they can generally move on the movement speed and everything else works almost the same. However, players and dungeon masters need to keep in mind both the vertical and horizontal distances when determining whether or not an attack, spell, or heal has the range that it needs in order to hit its target. As I said, basically flying movement works extremely similarly as general movement, and with this, all the various rules associated with general movement carry over as well. These include the various aspects such as dashing, disengaging, and attacks of opportunity. Generally, when characters look at becoming a flying person, or maybe a dungeon master playing a flying creature, one of the first tactics that seem very obvious is going to be to swoop down, attack the melee character, and then swoop back up out of the melee character's reach. However, the flaw with this general tactic is that that melee character will still get an attack of opportunity, even though you'll be out of his reach by the end of your turn. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there is a unique flying ability called Flyby, which is found in various monsters such as the Paraton. With this, a flyby creature does not invoke an opportunity attack when swooping down and attacking an enemy and then leaving out of reach. This is not available to 5th edition player characters to my knowledge. However, if you're looking for this kind of swoop by flyby rogue, that is exactly the class that you should play, a rogue, as you will get the disengage action as a bonus action, and then can use that every turn in order to make your attacks and quickly go back out of reach. So I've sold you. You've decided to build a character whose sole purpose in life is to provide death from above, flying by enemies, destroying them out of reach. Excellent. But how do you go about building this character? And what kind of character does it have to be? Well, like I said before, there are a ton of options in Dungeons & Dragons to give you a player character the ability to fly. Some of these are going to depend on your racial choice. Others will depend on your class choice, and still others are available to all characters. So let's go through some of these now, starting with those specific to a racial choice. We'll start with the most obvious, which is if you want flight and you want it early, play a race that gives you wings. These include the Aarakocra and the Tiefling variants. The Aarakocra are a race of winged birdmen who hail from the elemental plane of air. They start at level 1 with the ability to fly with a flying speed of 50 and a base walking speed of 25. And they were originally released as part of the Elemental Evil Player's Companion. Another option, this one coming to us from the Sword Coast Adventurer Guide, is the Tiefling variant, in which the Tiefling trades their Infernal Legacy traits, which grant them various spells as they go about leveling up, and instead give them a base flying speed at level 1 instead. I should also mention that while not officially released, Dragonborn also gained the ability to grow wings as part of the racial feats that were released as an Unearthed Arcana back in 2017. With this, at level 4, Dragonborns can take the Dragon Wings feat, which grants them wings, giving them 20 feet flying speed, as long as the Dragonborn is not wearing heavy armor. In addition to various races, there are also subclasses that provide the ability to fly at various levels. The most notable of these is going to be the Dragonborn Sorcerer, who gains permanent flying wings at level 14. However, as a high-level sorcerer, he or she will have ample access to spells and magical items by that point that would have granted them fly a long time ago. Taking a look at these spells, this is really the first chance that anyone not wanting to play an Aarakocra or a Tiefling variant will have in order to start flying in the early game, really as early as level 5, or even earlier if your Dungeon Master is willing to give you some magical items along the way. The most obvious of these spells is going to be the Fly spell, a 3rd level transmutation concentration spell that is available to sorcerers, wizards, artificers, warlocks, eldritch knight fighters, and arcane trickster rogues. It will give the target of its spell a 60 feet flying speed for up to 10 minutes as long as the caster concentrates on the spell. And in addition to that, if the spell is cast at a higher level, additional targets can be a part of the same casting of the spell. Also in the realm of the arcane is Levitate, a 2nd level concentration spell that is essentially a poor man's fly spell. I say this because while it is available to all of the classes that I just listed to fly, it does not allow you the same kind of freedom of movement that just getting a 60-foot fly speed does. Levitate works a little bit differently, as it is mostly thought of as a crowd control spell, or one that can incapacitate a target on the field. When cast, the target is raised 20 feet in the air and can only move vertically using their movement speed unless that target pulls themselves along a certain structure, which can include walls and ceilings, in order to move horizontally. This can work in battle by incapacitating a target, not allowing them to move towards you. Or you could be using it on your own player characters who don't have to make a will save if they want this cast on them, and simply use it to vertically levitate upwards. In addition to being available to the previous classes that I mentioned, Arachidasi also get this as a racial spell that they can cast once per day. And the last real option open to arcane spellcasters outside of a wish spell is going to be the 4th level concentration spell, Polymorph. This spell is available to clerics of the trickery domain, bards, wizards, sorcerers, eldritch knight fighters, and arcane trickster rogues. With Polymorph, the target can choose to either transform themselves or party members into a flying beast, which would also grant them flying. And as the CR of a player character who knows 4th level spells is well above that of various flying creatures, you should have no problem picking out a flying beast from the monster manual to turn yourself into. Druids as well can especially alter their forms into various different flying creatures. However, it's not really until level 8 that druids come into this power in order to transform themselves into a flying creature. So what happens if none of these classes interest you as a player, and you don't have a handy magician in the party who's there to cast fly on everyone anytime they want to go soaring through the skies? Well, it's time to look to fat loots in order to provide the answer to all of the flying dreams that we've been having. Starting simply, one of the easiest ways to give a player character flying in your campaign, if you so desire, is the Winged Boots, a wondrous, uncommon item that simply gives the player a flying speed equal to their normal movement speed. This lasts up to 4 hours, but you should seriously consider as a Dungeon Master before giving a party the ability to fly how often player characters will be able to use this item, and how it will limit your ability to solve various puzzles or overcome different environmental challenges in the future. The Flying Carpet is another wondrous rare item that has no limit on the amount of flying time that a player character can use it for, as long as that character knows its command word. There are various different flying carpets found within the Dungeon Master's Guide that will come at the discretion of the Dungeon Master at your table. The difference between the different sizes is that smaller carpets will go faster but have lower carrying capacities, while larger carpets will have higher carrying capacities but slower speeds. At higher carrying capacities, multiple party members are able to fly on the magic carpet at once and allow them to soar through the airs and overcome various obstacles. The Broom of Flying is another uncommon, wondrous item that also has unlimited fly time. It can carry any player character under 200 pounds with the fly speed of 50 feet. With this, in true Harry Potter style, it also has the ability to go anywhere that you tell it within a mile and instantly return to you when spoken its command word. And finally, the Wings of Flying is a magical cloak that requires attunement that allows the wearer to speak its command word, granting a 60-foot flying speed for up to 1 hour, and can be cast every 1d12 hours. If the idea of giving your player characters a permanent magical item that allows them to fly, or having to base all of your future encounters around that is too baffling to you as a Dungeon Master, one of the simpler options you can give to a player character who just dreams of flying is a consumable item. These include potions of fly, or even scrolls of fly is probably the easiest thing to do, and these are typically usually worth around 500 gold as a 3rd level spell. Obviously that price will vary campaign to campaign. These will allow a simple one-time use of the spell in that clutch situation while not having to base your entire campaign around this ability. Alright, so we have a flying player character, or maybe a flying monster, or maybe even both, and we're ready to start combat. But how do you keep track of all the various vertical distances of all of these different flying creatures at once, especially given that most tactical maps are simply horizontal with miniatures that don't really change height? Well, let me introduce you to Combat Tier. Combat Tiers are clear plastic platforms with adjustable heights. They allow for easy tracking of heights as they utilize a similar grid-based system found on maps, but allow these to go in the vertical and horizontal plane, allowing for easy tracking of distances, which can be especially cumbersome with multiple monsters or even players when they start flying on the same map. Within a single box, you can show an elevation from 10 to 50 feet, and they do sell extensions that will allow you to go even higher if needed. They're useful anytime you're in a 3D fight, such as underwater, standing on a wall, etc. And for the longest time, they were pretty difficult to find, as they got immensely popular after being featured on Critical Role. However, I'll include a link in the description below to where you can find them on either Amazon Prime or Paizo's websites. For gamers who are looking with a budget, a great alternative that I've found is to place a miniature on top of a dice container, which there are almost always at least 4 of at any given table, and while less accurate visually, you can always place a note under the block to inform you how high the person or the creature is flying in the air. Alright, so we've finally done it. Our player character is soaring above the battlefield, leaving devastation down on our foes, and we've got some nice miniature stands set up so that this is clearly displayed. But the concentration ends. He's knocked prone and suddenly starts tumbling down to the battlefield. That's right, any table that needs to keep track of flight also needs to keep track of falling in the back of their minds as well. Certain spells like Levitate specifically state that the target, when it ends, slowly floats back down to the ground, but for things such as racial wings or even some forms of polymorph, getting knocked prone is going to lead you into a nosedive, crashing into the ground. Falling rules had a lot of clarification done with the release of Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and in it, the specific rules state that anytime a flying creature is paralyzed, immobilized, has its speed reduced to 0, or is knocked prone, the creature's wings stop functioning and it simply drops to the ground. When the fall occurs, it happens instantly, unless the fall is greater than 500 feet. And thus, player characters don't really get the option of using their action to catch another player characters, nor can the falling player character use their movement to kind of turn into a tumble that reduces the damage. It happens on the enemy turn, and therefore the only thing that a player character is allowed to do is use a reaction that may be something like the spell Featherfall, which allows them to stop the damage of the fall. Falling will cause 1d6 per 10 feet of falling, and this maxes out at 20d6 of damage. If a player character does fall more than 500 feet, they will fall 500 feet per round and will take that damage when they finally do hit an altitude of 0. Once a target does hit the ground, they will be prone, which means they will either need to use half their movement or a readied action to stand back up. And the only real exceptions to these falling rules that go from flying are people who are held aloft by someone else through some kind of magical means, as you can still fly even if you fall down by magic, or some enemies will have the hover feature, which means that even if their wings were to start functioning, they will still be held aloft in the air. And with that, you're ready to start soaring through the skies in your next Dungeons & Dragons adventure. Keep in mind that with flight, there's probably going to be a part that goes into some murky, unpreviously covered area that doesn't have a specific rule about it. Just keep in mind that specific rules always trump general runs, and be ready to homebrew a rule if the situation requires it. I'd love to hear about all of your guys' best and craziest flying stories in your Dungeons & Dragons, and I hope they inspire me or anyone else who's watching this to do some crazy antics in their next campaign. As always, you can leave those down in the comments below, and I'll be sure to check them out. As always, I love you, love you, love you forever. If you liked, favorite, and subscribe to my channel, where you can find all things Dungeons & Dragons rules. You can check any of my previous videos out over here or over here. I'm RPGMD, writing you a prescription on all things dice, dragons, and gaming, and I'll be seeing you guys next week.